This podcast is about the topic of toxic siblings. Now, this is a very touchy subject because I'm sure quite a lot of you can relate for various reasons. Sometimes when we're children, we don't necessarily realise that we have a toxic sibling. I think we realise it a little bit in our perhaps teenage years or adult years. And sometimes it can cause quite a lot of conflict and sadly not many resolutions either, as you get older. And it seems almost like it gets worse, to be fair, as you get older. So let's think about why we might have some toxic sibling relationships. Most relationships that we have with our siblings as you're growing up, there's always that like tug of war between the parent and the child and the various different siblings within that relationship of that family household. All of us come from very different backgrounds. We might have siblings from biological parents, we might have siblings from step parents, we might have siblings through marriage and, various other dynamics because obviously the world is changing now. But what tends to happen, sadly, is that certain siblings have a particular way of being quite the enigmatic and dynamic individual that takes that sort of role and central role of the relationship within your family tree. It can get to a point where it can cause huge disharmony throughout the whole of the family, and sometimes it gets to a situation where the individual that really clearly hasn't done anything wrong is used as a bit of a scapegoat because people don't want to rock the boat and they don't want to deal with the fact that this sibling is toxic. They'd rather keep that toxic individual within the family dynamics because sometimes it's easier, as we say, to keep your enemies close and your friends at a distance, even though if it's a sibling situation. There are times when there'll be situations occurring in your particular family household you might not necessarily be living together, but perhaps this sibling still has interaction with your parents. That could be step parents, as I've discovered, it could be adoptive parents, and it can be other individuals that you have encounters with, and we all can relate to that on some huge scale. So there are times when this individual, no matter what's happened between the two of you, you might have had a small fight that's gone into a big fight. It might be certain principles that you've argued on. It might be that you just clash. Maybe you're too alike, maybe you're too different. It could be that you don't necessarily got on because of certain ways that you would conduct yourself and they would conduct themselves, and they don't necessarily merge between the two. And unfortunately, tension has occurred and friction occurs, and sometimes you can't necessarily resolve these issues overnight. Some of the warning signs are when, I guess, both parties, and sometimes it can be more than two individuals, it can be 3 and 4, where you have toxic siblings. It can be that they don't see that they're doing anything wrong. And in their particular perception, and I will use the word perception, they genuinely think they haven't done anything wrong. They think they're the one with integrity, they're the one that's right, they're the one that hasn't done anything wrong. They haven't broken any moral codes, any legal codes, they haven't broken any friction between the household. They just think that they're doing their own bit of justice. And at times, the parent might not necessarily intervene. This could be a grown parent, obviously, might not necessarily intervene because they don't want to get into the middle of this whole fight between the two siblings because they're probably adults at this stage, And it can be very, very frustrating when you've got somebody who clearly is in the wrong, okay, and they don't see that. They don't see that their perception of the way they are handling things, conducting themselves is wrong. This particular toxic sibling might also be somebody that, plays the card that they're the favourite amongst the other siblings as well. And this can have its advantages and disadvantages. This comes about to, the topic of ego and id, and again, the power dynamics between the siblings and the whole attention sort of seeking behaviour that they have where, the focus is on them, not the other individuals that they've caused disharmony with. And that also, plays with their own mind that they're clearly in the right, they're not in the wrong, and that obviously has knock-on consequences, it has knock-on effects. they don't see that actually they're being controlling, controlling the family dynamics, controlling the people around them. Traditionally there are times of the year, in certain situations, for example, family gatherings, birthdays, christenings, unfortunately funerals. It can be, depending on different religious states, it could be Eid celebrations, it could be Hanukkah, it could be Diwali. It could be any of those particular family gatherings where this person will use their manipulation to control the situation in whichever shape or form. I've known situations where, for example, in some households, they've had to put one individual in one room, one individual in another room, purely so that there is no argument that's going to occur. There's no friction that's going to occur. And in worst case scenarios, they put them in completely a different building, or, done particular events to ensure that that toxic relationship doesn't have a knock-on effect with other people. And this is how bad it gets. The family can't resolve it. The family can't sort this situation out, because the other individual is very, very good at manipulating what's going on. Talking of manipulation, sometimes they're very, very good. This toxic, sibling is very good at manipulating you and manipulating what they can get out of you in order to satisfy themselves. So, for example, it might be that they call upon a favour. They want you to babysit their children. They want you to maybe look after their pets or look after their house when they've gone on holiday. But when it comes to you needing the same favour, it's not the same. And the parental focus or the family focus also is manipulated to basically do as that other individual wants, because they don't want the drama. They don't want the situation to be exploded in their face. And it could be other situations too, parents helping that particular individual out of financial situations. A lot of people now are getting into financial debt, and they're getting themselves in situations where they're unable to help themselves get out of the rut they've caused themselves. So sometimes they're very clever in getting financial support and assistance. They might, rant at you, rant at other people about what is affecting them, but really they're manipulating the situation and playing victim so that empathy can be given towards them. This can often, upset and anger the other individual who, in the family dynamics, might also need financial support, might also need financial help, but unfortunately they're not getting it. And that can be down to a number of things, can't it? It can be down to a number of factors, not just necessarily one. So there are scenarios where that sibling, will do everything they can. And some of the times what they do is very, 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 very cleverly, they will dismiss and invalidate your feelings to a whole extreme level where you are the bad guy, they're the good guy. Okay? And a bit like the Clint Eastwood film, The Good, the Bad and the Ugly, it is very much like that. Sometimes you're borderline on the fence. You might be very, very angry, you're irritated, you're upset, and you can clearly see how other people are being manipulated and are being controlled by this one toxic sibling. But unfortunately, you're powerless to do anything about it, And at times, other people in the family might dismiss your quite solid and quite found reasons, and they will dismiss it and make you out to be the bad guy. For example, saying, "Oh, you're the one that needs mental help," when actually it's the other individual quite clearly that is manipulative and is the one that needs that support and needs that help, but is very able to make you seem like the irrational person, an irrational person that needs help. They often are very clever at creating conflict out of something that is nothing. And sometimes you will have a situation or a scenario where everything is pleasant, everything is calm. Perhaps you've just got your family back to being calm and being at peace, and you're mending bridges and you're mending, love and care between your family. And perhaps you're getting in a situation where the toxic relationship has sort of taken a back burner, and you're just about to start helping yourself get on a situation where you're at a plain level field. And unfortunately, this individual doesn't like that. And they'll do everything they can to manipulate it again to cause conflict, right? So to cause conflict for you, to cause conflict for others as well. And that's what I'm saying about the mind games, because when they're an adult, they are very easily able to manipulate the other sibling and the people around you. And they'll do other things as well. They'll degrade you in front of others. So whether this is, listing off all your small misdemeanors, for example, it could be like you've left a cup inside the sink that you've not washed it straight away. For example, you were going to wash it in a couple of minutes. Maybe you got a phone call, and that individual makes it a big drama out of that particular incident and says, well, you don't clean, you don't look after your house, you neglect your children. And they make a huge melodrama out of something very, very small. Okay? And this is where the neglect issue comes in. Okay? There are times when you have to look at this scenario and think, is this person worth being in my life? And you try your best, you try your hardest to keep at peace and to keep at a calm, nurturing environment for the sake of your family, for the sake of other people around you. Sometimes that's not always possible. And sometimes you keep quiet about the situations and the scenario that other person causes. And there are times when you really can't stay quiet. And you'll find, unfortunately, in these scenarios that you are neglected. You'll find that there's friction, obviously, between the households. There are friction between your friends because you're all in the inner circle. There's friction with other family members, and other people are forced in some respects to choose sides. And it's not something you want, but it happens, And unfortunately, this is one of the side effects, and it's a big, horrible emotional side effect where family members, unfortunately, start to neglect you, okay? And it's not easy to deal with. It's not easy to accept on the first case, and it's not easy to understand. Sometimes you try your hardest to understand the thousands of excuses that somebody might give you for not being a part of their life. And there are other times when you really do have to back off and realize that the best thing to do is to walk away. Now, how do we move forward from this? How do we move forward from this? Nowadays, it's easy with social media, with platforms like WhatsApp, with Viber, with other various social networks, even with your mobile phone. It is very easy to block a number and to block someone out of your life from sending you, nasty messages, nasty text messages. There are some cases where some family members, unfortunately, have had to go to the police. They've had to get subpoenas. They've had to get particular restraining orders. They maybe had to go and get the police to speak to that individual, where sometimes, this family dynamics is just not working. And sometimes people view this as, you're being quite horrible, you're being quite nasty. Well, actually, what that individual is doing is trying to practice a bit of self-care and a bit of self-love. And also they're trying to put boundaries in place so that they can protect themselves from the harm. Because, a lot of this toxic relationship from the other sibling is mental abuse. It's mental health abuse. It's emotional abuse. It's psychological abuse as well. And the other individual doesn't necessarily see it like that, So one of the things that you have to start to practice, and it's very hard to do that, is think to yourself, well, if that individual is going to behave like that, even though I've tried everything, even though you might have nieces, nephews, you might have other siblings that are involved, sometimes it's best just to step away and to step back and set yourself boundaries in the meantime as well. You'll try your hardest to talk to that sibling and talk to your family members about what is going on. And if you get to a situation where, those people don't realize what is going on, then that's when you sort of put in the self-care and the boundaries and ensure that you're protecting your health and your mental health. Sometimes, talking to the sibling doesn't necessarily go the way you want it to go. You can try your hardest to have a conversation with that person and try to say to them, look, putting our argument aside, I don't think what you said was nice. I don't think what you said was poor behaviour. What you said was quite horrible, actually, and it was degrading, and it's not helping my mental health. You can have all these different types of confrontation. Sometimes people have mediation in the middle, with a professional to try and help them. And sometimes it's not always possible. So the reason I'm mentioning, blocking people is because sometimes for your own sake and for your own mental health sake, that sometimes is the best thing to do. Sometimes people do things like moving away, moving to a different area, different location. And that's always not possible as well because of finances. Again, you might be bumping into them because of where you live in your neighbourhood, There are times as well where maybe, if they're still part of your life but sort of on the outside, you sort of decide to choose your battles and choose which ones you're going to select. So even though you might have blocked them, you might unblock them, for example, you might talk to them in a diplomatic way. If that doesn't work, then maybe you decide that these specific things that they're crossing align with me and my expectations and my barriers and my respect. If they're not working, then sometimes you have to decide which battles you're going to have to choose that is going to help you and going to help them. In some scenarios, there's been situations where whole family members have had to go for group counselling, and they've had to go for dealing with that toxic relationship, and they've had to discover what is actually going on a subconscious and unconscious level. And sometimes it's not always, again, possible to do that because of finances, because sometimes the other individual doesn't want to take part, and you might not want to take part as well. Some people also decide to just take a step back, like I've said, and focus on the domestic situation between that sibling, and realize that there are things that they just can't do. There's things that they just can't help. The conflict is something that is not going to go away overnight. No matter how much you have resolution with somebody. And like I said, sometimes the toxic sibling, the parents don't necessarily want to get involved. They don't want to be necessarily a part of it, And sometimes it is part of life, having siblings where you're not necessarily getting on with them. Not all siblings are close, and some of them are very toxic. Some of them are damaged, and some of them can cause damage to you and other people around you as well. And you can try all these different tactics. In some cases, worst case scenarios, you might have to just, block them out of your life, so to speak. That means not communicating with them anymore, making sure perhaps they're not on any of your social networking platforms, and also ensuring that the people that are around you within your family circle also respect that as well. They're not divulging or sharing things that you don't necessarily want the other individual to know. Okay, so there are ways out there, and by doing all these things, obviously we're setting barriers, we're setting boundaries in place to respect ourselves, to respect our space, and to respect our feelings, and to make sure that we're not harmed in the ways that I've already described. And sometimes, letting go and letting them go and letting them be themselves and letting them continue to be their toxic self, I guess, it has, a knock-on effect with others, but at least you are looking after yourself. You're showing yourself self-care. You're showing yourself that you are worthy of much more. You've tried various strategies to fix this scenario. You've tried to fix the situation between yourself and the other person, and it's just not working, and all of us need to step back so that we can heal individually, and we can work on our own issues, whether it's in our marriage, whether it's our jobs, our, day-to-day living. So there are different scenarios like that too, Some people have been successful where the sibling rivalry or the break has had that distance and had that gap, and people have woken up a little bit as well and realised, actually, I was quite petty fighting about this. And there are situations where they come back and the healthy boundaries are back in place and they can start again. Sadly, sometimes that doesn't happen either. Sometimes you walk away and you realise that the best thing to do is just to keep walking away and keep that person at a distance, So all of us will have various different scenarios, and all of us can relate to some of the things that I've already discussed. It's not just one particular answer. These are things that each family, each person is going to have a different handle on this, and a different perspective on this, and a different experience on this. And at the end of the day, you have to do what's right for you, and you have to do what's right for your particular scenario and what's right for your mental health. And that's the main thing that concerns me. And, all of these can make or break us too. So we have to be aware of that. If you are dealing with similar scenarios, make sure you're reaching out to, I guess, a mutual friend, someone that can, relate to you, someone that can understand, someone that isn't necessarily going to cause judgment or ask you to choose sides either, and sometimes that's also quite hard to focus on and to find. Wherever you are in that particular journey of, toxic relationships with siblings, I wish you the best. It's not easy. There are times when it's a smooth road, there's times when there's bumps, and there's times you're going to feel like there's a big mountain that you've got to climb. And each of us will have to experience that in our own way. But wherever you are with that particular journey, I wish you love and I wish you peace. And I hope you find resolution either way. Take care. Bye for now. Thank you for listening.